let's jump right into the birth story. I'm going to leave some timestamps below in case you want to jump around. Our son, Oliver Samuel Bolaños, is now 5.5. I'm going to tell his birth story today. He was our rainbow baby. Our firstborn son, Judah, we lost him in the second trimester. His story is much more traumatic and painful. I have told it before, but this one is joyful. Thankfully, it had a happy ending, and we get to live life with him every day, and he is a wonderful, wonderful human being. After Judah and before Oliver, we also had a miscarriage. So Oliver was long awaited. We had faced a lot of pain along the way, but when we finally got that pregnancy test that was positive, though it was exciting, we were also terrified. What if this all happens again? So we went into his pregnancy with a lot more hesitation and just awareness. Not everything goes according to plan. And so I was really praying over his pregnancy and birth from the beginning, even though I prayed over all of them, and I really feel like God was gracious with all of them. I just wanted this to be the redemption. And that comes into play later when I talk about a specific verse from Isaiah. But we did finally get pregnant, and I actually started bleeding at the beginning. And that, of course, triggered a lot of this fear. So we were living overseas at the time, and I ended up seeing an OB whose specialty was IVF. And though my pregnancy was not IVF pregnancies are high risk. And so the doctor knew what to do. He was very much aware of the fact that, okay, she's had recurrent miscarriages. Let's be checking HCG, progesterone, get her on progesterone. And I felt so taken care of, even though we were overseas and there were obviously still concerns about, what does quality of healthcare look like here? I was still really happy. I will say, so we were living in a poorer area of a country in Central Asia, and when we would walk in, so you had to bring your own drinking water because there wasn't drinking water there, and everything was really hot. They had fans, and they would pour water into the fans to provide some evaporative cooling, but it was still just very uncomfortable, especially as a pregnant woman. But the hard part was actually as you walked down the hallway, because he also did some education and he did IVF, and this is a different country, things are different, he had fetuses of different gestations, 3 of them in different jars, preserved, and you had to walk by those on a shelf on your way to his office. And that was very painful as a woman who had held my son in the second trimester and then had an early miscarriage, and whose every waking nightmare was pregnancy loss. So to walk by those was very triggering, but he himself was the perfect OB for us, and I'm very thankful that we found him. But it was just one of those instances where being in a third world country made it harder. So I had bleeding in my first trimester, so we had extra appointments, extra ultrasounds. I was on progesterone, and at one point I was in the 20-week mark. I don't remember exactly what gestation. I just kept having contractions all of a sudden one night, and I knew now, at this point, what those felt like after delivering Judah. He was born at home, but I did end up going to the hospital with some complications. So I had experienced contractions during his birth. So I knew, okay, these are contractions. I should not be having contractions in the second trimester, especially this early. And we called the doctor. Of course, it was at night. Why do these things always happen at night? So he sent us not to his small clinic, because that's only during the day and only for appointments, not for deliveries. He sent us to a hospital, which was actually good because it was closer to where we lived. And we just saw staff there and was messaging him updates. But it was kind of disconcerting because we showed up, we went in, and you see the NICU as you go by, and it's labeled nice, and that's cool that they have that, but there's no staff, the lights are off, no one's home. So it's I cannot go into labor here. They don't have any equipment here. I've seen so much loss. So to walk by that empty NICU, I just told my body, like, you have to keep your baby in. Of course I'm praying, but I'm like telling myself, like, you cannot go through this again. Judah was born in the United States, but I'm here. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I almost died after Judah was born. I can't do that here. There's not the medical care. And it was as though I was trying to get my body to align with what I was telling it to do, because this was not the time. But I went in and got on the monitor. I don't know what medication they gave me. They gave me something, and it really calmed everything down. And then one other time I had breakthrough bleeding a couple weeks later, again in the second trimester, out of nowhere, no subchorionic hemorrhage. Sorry, I had to pause it. One of my sons woke up from nap. So they were able to stop the labor, which was fantastic. But then we began to talk to our doctor, okay, looking at the complications I had after Judah was born, and then the miscarriage, and then now Oliver's pregnancy's been a little complicated. Do you think it's a good idea for us to continue through with the idea of us delivering with you here in this country? And he said, no, I think you're high risk. Yes, I can do it, but I think going back home might be best. Also, all his staff only spoke the language, local language, and though I was learning it, and I am bilingual, I'm bilingual in a totally different language. I'm bilingual in Khmer, which is the language of Cambodia. We were not there, so to communicate with his staff while I'm laboring, it would have to be translated through my husband or this doctor, and I just didn't know if I wanted that. So he said, you need to travel at 32 weeks and then not come back until the baby is 8 weeks old, because I'd like you to get the 8-week-old shots at 7 weeks, give them time to kick in before you come. So we were like, oh my goodness, now we're going back to the United States. It means staying with my in-laws, which they're totally fine with, by the way, and they have a 2-level house, so we were able to stay upstairs in our own bedrooms. But it was still just like, man, flying internationally, that high altitude while pregnant is risky in and of itself. So I just really wanted to double check. But we talked to the US doctor, and they were in agreement. So it just seemed like the best option. Now, we had not been allowed to, during the anatomy scan of our baby, find out the gender, because it's illegal. Because girls are more commonly aborted. So we were not allowed to find out the gender. But we had gone on a visa run to Thailand, and while there had a repeat anatomy scan, and they told us that the baby was a girl. So we were like, oh my goodness, we're having a girl. We're going to name her Anna, and this will be great. So at 32 weeks, we go to the United States. I'm getting set up with an OB in the same hospital where I delivered Judah, and I'm getting an ultrasound. We're getting checked in. She's like, so what are you having? I was like, it's a girl. Her name is Anna. And we'd had a baby shower. So we had all these girl things already. And it was like 5 days before my bigger baby shower with family and friends in the United States. She puts the wand or the thing on my belly. And the first thing that pops up on the screen is my son's anatomy. And I knew I'm not looking at a girl. And she says, it's a boy. And then I just start sobbing. Not because I was disappointed to have a boy. I was thrilled that I had life within me and that it was healthy. It was because I had built up this persona of baby Anna. I'd been speaking to baby Anna, and all of a sudden she was gone. And it triggered that loss in me. And that was so hard. Even postpartum, when I was holding him in my arms in the middle of the night while nursing him or whatever, I would say she. I would use female pronouns because I was just so ingrained. It was still ingrained in me that it was going to be baby Anna. But anyway, now I can't imagine anything besides being a boy mom. My life is dirt and rocks and sticks and gross motor movement, jumping, running. My sons are very active. So we found out it was a boy. And then a few weeks later, I remember all of a sudden it felt like I broke out in hives. Like my stomach wanted to rip itself out and was just bright red. And I would wake myself up in the night scratching and bleeding. And I go to the doctor, and it turns out I had PUPPPS. I will put the name on the screen. It's pregnancy-induced something. It was miserable. It felt like I had poison ivy, which I'm not even allergic to poison ivy, so this was like bizarre that this was triggering me. But I mean, the only place I did not itch was my face and the soles of my hand and the soles of my feet. Everything else itched horribly. Like my stomach literally was raw and had claw marks because I would scratch myself in my sleep, even though I cut my fingernails short. So I eventually, by the way, if you have pups, the thing that helped me was a soap on Amazon. It's like Grandpa's old pine tar soap, and it smells like Silver Dollar City. It smells like pine tar. I don't know what. Anyway, but I would, and you couldn't have the warm water because it would make the itching worse. So I would step into cool water to get my body wet, turn the water onto warm, and step into the steam. That way I wasn't totally frigid, and then rub myself everywhere with suds, and then just stand there. And I mean, I did this 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m., over and over and over because I could barely sleep. So then this gets so bad that I have spent multiple nights catnapping, multiple nights getting very little sleep, and it became a little scary because it was to the point where I was so miserable and so sleep deprived. I was worried what birth would be like. So we ended up trying to do some steroids to try and help the itch because topical steroids were doing absolutely nothing. So I did take some oral steroids, and I hadn't even finished it before I ended up going into labor. So that in and of itself is actually probably good. I think my body recognized that it was time to deliver because this was getting out of hand. So my OB was off the weekend that we were going to deliver. She was coming back on Monday, and one of those nights, it was a Friday night actually, I started having some contractions. I was like walking around a parking lot, and then they went away, and then we went home, and I was like, well, let me try pumping and bringing them back. And then they were like super regular, and I called the OB's office, and not my OB. This was a standby woman who only worked nights just to cover the desk. She was horrible to me. My husband, who was on the other side of the room getting dressed and packing our bags, was able to hear her through the phone yelling at me. And she was saying, if your contractions are 5 minutes apart, you should already be in our waiting room. Do you want to kill your baby? What are you doing? She had no idea my background, but who says that to a mom? Like, you told me to wait till they were 5 minutes apart, you meaning your office, and then to call. I'm following protocol. So that was horrible. And I get in the car, we go to triage, and as I'm driving, I'm like praying for my labor to stop. I'm like, I cannot deliver with that woman. She is horrible. And just praying and praying that my labor would stop. So we get there, and you know, they tell me to walk around. They just have me monitor me occasionally. I was, I want to say 3.5 or 4 centimeters by this point. And then my labor came to a complete standstill, and we got sent home. And then a day or two later, my contractions came back. Saturday they came back, and they had told me that like last time, call us again when they get to 5 minutes apart, Maybe this time just make sure they last a little longer. So I go home. Again, they start the next day, and I call because they told me to, and the woman is yelling at me again. Same woman, she's on weekend shift. And I was sobbing. Like, you cannot scream at me and tell me I'm going to kill my baby when I've lost 2 children and have tried. I've done everything. Like, I've limited movement, I've eaten healthy, I'm hydrating, like, I'm taking any vitamin you tell me to. Anything you suggest to me, I'm gonna do. Like, I'm gonna follow. I feel like I was doing everything. Whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it. But why would you try to put this blame on me, right? So I tell my husband, I'm not going in, I'm gonna pray and stay home. And sure enough, the contractions stopped again, and I'm confident it was because my body went into fight or flight mode when she started yelling at me. I think sometimes, even as a nurse, like even as a healthcare worker, I've seen it, but healthcare workers can easily get burnt out and lose empathy especially if they're sleep deprived. And I think that that's what was happening to this woman. So I'm not saying that I'm like demonizing her and having no compassion on her, but I am just saying if you're that burnt out in your job, you need a new job. You need a new job. Like, this is not what you should be doing if you're that burnt out. Anyway, my 2 cents. So Monday rolls around and, going back, Sunday night, I get my Bible and I start praying Isaiah 55. Before she wasn't even in labor, she gave birth. She gave birth to a son. I'm praying for a fast labor. I'm praying for a pain-free labor, praying for a healthy child, and I'm using Isaiah 55 to pray through that hope. And I said, God, you know what I've been through. You know what these 2 phone calls have been like. I am going to lay these requests out before you as plainly as I can. I want my birth to be in the daylight. I want sunlight in my room when I deliver. And I am praying that my birth be less than 6 hours. And I'm going to pray that it be as painless as possible. Amen. So I knew from having gone into the OB's office that I was like 4.5 centimeters already. So as soon as I went into labor, I was like, okay, this time it's Monday morning. My doctor's there. It's daylight. I had this amazing time of prayer last night through Isaiah 55. I'm feeling very at peace. Let's go ahead and go in. The contractions have stayed around and they were significantly stronger. And right before we left, I was sitting on the toilet and I felt my water break just a little bit. With Judah, it like broke like a water balloon, but this was like, okay, I can tell that this is my water. So ladies, if you have not bought them, there is a certain brand of Depends for women that I highly recommend. Makes the car ride a lot easier if you're worried about your water. So anyway, didn't have any messes. Thank you. So I get there and we had let some family members know. And once we got in and they said, okay, you're already like 6 centimeters. So we knew this was active labor moving forward. But I was talking up a storm. I was thrilled. My baby's finally coming. It's sticking around. Like, I loved my OB. And so some family came by. And I remember at one point, my sister-in-law and my best friend Becca were in the room with me and I'm chit-chatting with them. And I knew, okay, if I sit down on the bed, the contractions are more mild. If I stand up, they get more intense. So to control the contractions and the speed of the labor, I'm going to sit down right now. That way things are more calm. Because my husband was playing hostess in the waiting room and trying to make everybody feel welcome and calling all the family back home. And I just needed him with me. So eventually I had this one contraction that was super intense. It felt like my son was coming out of my bum. Like the pressure was so low and back that it felt more like I needed to go to the toilet. And so I like put my hands on the bed and almost like lift myself up a little bit to get the pressure off. And my sister-in-law was like, where's Pablo? Like, where's my brother? And I was like, oh, I think he went to the waiting room to like play hostess. And she's like, he needs to be in here with you. So they left and Pablo came in. Just to go back a little bit, I had decided I wanted to do it without an epidural if I could. I had an unmedicated DNC after Judah was born. So I know that I can handle pain. And I also just wanted to make sure that things went as smoothly as possible and didn't get delayed or complicated because maybe I had a bad reaction to something. Because that had happened after Judah. I had a bad reaction to the medication they gave me to try to induce medications to deliver the placenta. And I just wanted as little medication as possible. So, and they had wireless monitors that I was on, and I only had an IV like saline locked. I didn't have an IV like line. So I was able to move around, which was really nice. I had some oils diffusing and some music playing, and Pablo came in and I would just rest my cheek on his and we would rock back and forth. We were praying a lot, praying out loud, praying together, rocking back and forth. And she checked me and I was like 9 centimeters or 9.5. And she's like, there's almost just a lip over the lip of cervix over his head. Like, you're so close to being complete. And by this point, I had not really had any pain. Like, I'd had a lot of pressure where it felt like he was going out the back, but not real pain. And that pressure also did get a little easier once I stood up. But by this point, it really had just felt like intense pressure. Like if you work out in the gym, you know, where you're fighting for that last rep, but you're not cut, like your biceps not been severed off. You're just fighting for that last rep. Do you know what I mean? So it felt like that, like intense work and work and contraction, but didn't feel like the pain of a surgical cut or a surgical incision. So I really was feeling really hopeful, and I had told them I would be willing to try laughing gas, but I hadn't really needed it yet. So it was there if I wanted it. Just kind of took a puff now and then to kind of see what it would smell like and taste like, and if it made me nauseous and if it helped. And then all of a sudden, it was as though he like clicked into place or dropped that last little bit. And I remember mid-contraction, I went from, oh, like these high, soft sounds that really only me and my husband could hear, to, oh, like it was like deep in my throat, like I was like a lioness, and it was just like guttural. And I let out like one more sound like that, and Papa was like, I'm gonna go get somebody. Like, I do not know what's happening right now. Before he could even get to the door opened and everyone just walked in, and he's like, I think something just changed. And my doctor, who's just like calmly strolling in, goes, oh yeah, we know that sound. So they had just heard the shift in the tone of my voice and had immediately come in, and I wasn't even being that loud, but they knew I was close. It was just that lip of cervix over the baby's head, and that had apparently moved out of the way, and he had come down. So we got in the bed. Previously, I'd just been in bed for cervical checks. I have one contraction where I'm just kind of like learning how to push almost, and I'm like using laughing gas in between. But all of a sudden, I'm nervous. All of a sudden, I'm anxious. All of a sudden, I'm like, well, how long will this part take? I've never been through this. And the OB, bless her heart, she says, well, so I say, how long will that take? And she says, that depends on how you push. But I heard it as a challenge. I heard it as, that depends on how you push. So I pushed, and the next contraction, I pushed however many times you push in a contraction, and he was delivered the next contraction. So I pushed for 2 contractions. And because I pushed him out so intensely, and he wasn't small, he was a big baby, I tore 3 times. It was all 2nd-degree tears, but I basically tore in every direction, 3 different 2nd-degree tears. So my baby's on my chest, and all of a sudden I am desperate for that laughing gas. I'm like, he's out of me now. I know I'm not going to be producing milk for a while. Like, you make colostrum for 24 hours, so there's no chance of anything I take now getting into his system. So I immediately was like, I am ready for that morphine, because I know I'm going to have to get stitches. So I'm taking in the laughing gas. He's on my chest. And during 4 of the ultrasounds, he'd been sucking his thumb. 4 ultrasounds, he was sucking his thumb. Within seconds of laying on my chest, he was immediately sucking his thumb. So that was just so sweet. And I just remember apologizing to him. I'm sorry, I'm so distracted. I'm sorry, I'm so distracted. Because I was suddenly in a lot of pain. And the stitches were excruciating. That's the part that I never understand. Like, if your husband cut himself on some lawn equipment, like, he wouldn't go to the hospital and be like, yeah, stitching me up without any pain medicine. Why do we expect women to go through that? That part's bizarre to me. It's like, I had an unmedicated birth, but as soon as that baby was out, since I'm not making milk for at least 24 hours, I can have morphine. That's not going to be in my system by then. So I had 1 dose of morphine for the stitches, but honestly, it wasn't even fully kicked in. So the stitches were the only part that was like truly painful. And then I got wheeled into the room. Everybody came in and met the baby. It was chaos. It was special, but it was also chaos. And then that night, my sister-in-law had brought me some cookies from a bakery near the hospital. And I remember sitting up in bed. My husband was fast asleep on the couch, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed. I'd just been to the bathroom, and I was just eating these cookies and holding my babies and eating these cookies, and I just felt like the world was glowing. There was nothing wrong in the world. There was no pain, no sorrow. I was elated. I was the happiest person in the world. And the nurse walked in. She goes, oh my, aren't you so cheerful? And I was like, yes, like just holding my baby, like bursting with joy. Like, I remember that moment so clearly right now, and he's 5.5. In that moment, that was one of the best parts of postpartum. I will say it got a lot harder. I had intense postpartum anxiety, if anyone held him but me, including my husband, I would just feel my pulse in my throat and just like trembling to just like take the baby back. And he was colicky, so he would cry for hours at night. And we were living with our in-laws, so of course I felt the pressure to like try to keep him quiet. And if his cousin, the nephew, was ever over being babysat, I was like mortified that he was going to wake his cousin up. And then we had a non-traditional job at the time, so my husband didn't get specific postpartum leave, so I felt very much alone. Like I didn't have a car I could drive, so I was very isolated, and postpartum was hard. But he was a beautiful baby, and we got his 7 weeks shots, and at 8 weeks we flew back overseas and raised him for his first year of life overseas, and that was heaven. Heaven. I carried him with me in the carrier nonstop. He lived in that carrier, so it was like constant skin to skin, constant connection, constant love, constant dependence. It was beautiful. It was everything I had wanted, everything I had waited for. And he was my rainbow baby, and I love him so much. His name is Oliver Samuel. Samuel, in the book of the Bible where Hannah cried out to the Lord and begged God for a child, and she named him Samuel, and then he heard the voice of God and had an active relationship with the Lord, so that was why we picked Samuel. And then Oliver, after the olive branch, in the story of Noah and the ark, the storm of destruction and pain and utter desolation ultimately resulted in new life and a symbol of peace. And I just felt like that was what Oliver was going to be after our history with loss. And he is very much a part of our hearts now, and we couldn't imagine life without him. So that's my birth story with Oliver Samuel. I do have one more birth story to share, but these are longer and a bit more emotional, so I do not know when I will get Santiago's birth story up, but I will. He is 3.5. And I'm just so thrilled that I'm going to have these videos to look back on and remember all these precious details. But thank you so much for joining me. I would love for you to subscribe and join the family. Bye-bye.